So in spirituality, we say the term enlightenment a lot, and another term we say for enlightenment is awakening. And awakening is a very good term for enlightenment, but it sort of implies the question of, awakening to what or awakening from what. Jesus spoke many parables about not falling asleep or staying awake. The word Buddha means awakened one. So this theme of waking up, awakening to something is very prevalent in spirituality. And the normal answer you hear is that it's an awakening to the true self. And that's a good answer. But I want to offer up a new idea or a new way to think about it that could be equally as helpful for some of you. And that is awakening towards true intelligence. Not awakening of intelligence, but the awakening to intelligence. So the idea here is that your mind is actually not intelligent. Your mind actually does not know anything. Your mind can only remember things that it learns. But consciousness itself is intelligence. And only in consciousness is intelligent. The mind only knows things that it can taste, touch, see, hear, or smell. And if it cannot taste, touch, see, hear, or smell it, then it says that it isn't real. So it can only know objects, right? So for that reason, the mind overlooks consciousness. The mind overlooks the deeper intelligence from inside your being that is actually running the show. And consciousness is the opposite. If the mind is the doing aspect of creation, then your heart or consciousness or intelligence, whatever term you want to use for it, is the being aspect of creation. So consciousness doesn't announce its presence. It doesn't make itself known. It simply is, right? It simply is intelligence. And so it pervades all of experience, all of reality, but it is not making a grand red carpet entrance with trumpets blaring like the mind does, like the ego does. So because of this, the mind claims responsibility for intelligence, because of course, that's what the ego does. But actually, consciousness is intelligent, and you are consciousness. Consciousness is that which knows everything, which observes, perceives, experiences everything. And even when you just say the word intelligence, intelligence just means that which knows something, right? That which is aware of something. And consciousness is that which is aware of all of your experience 24/7. You cannot ever not be conscious, while you're in this density, this physical dimension. You are always experiencing. You can say, okay, I'm going to stop experiencing now. And you can't do it. You can stop thinking, you can stop doing many, many things, but stopping experience or awareness is not one of them, because that's what you are. And so consciousness doesn't announce itself. And so the mind, or what a lot of times I call it the substitute self, sort of fills the gap that it perceives is being left open by consciousness for intelligence. So as consciousness shines its witnessing light through the lens of the mind, it then gives the illusion that the mind is the one being aware. But the mind actually can only know past, right? The mind is sort of this computer program running in your head all the time that is constantly trying to dissect your reality and relate to your reality based on your past, based on your memories, your social conditioning, your upbringing. And so it's really just a computer program. There's nobody there. But it's mistaken as a real entity, the ego is. It's mistaken as yourself. And all that's actually happening is that some thoughts are there, always changing all the time. Some ideas, opinions are there, which are being given an identity as if they were an entity. But they are just thoughts, which are malleable, which are powerless unless you believe in them, which have no energy in and of themselves. They only have the energy that you supply them with your attention. And so the mind sees the world as a huge threat because it sees the universe and says, wow, this is so unimaginably complex. I can't possibly understand or control this. So it sort of will fabricate a false sense of control by labeling everything, by defining everything. And once the mind does that, it only ever relates to the label, right? So when you see a tree, the mind goes, oh, tree, I know what a tree is, moving on. Bird, got it, I know what a bird is, moving on. What's the next object, please? Human, I got humans down, I know what they are. Is that a dog? Dog, I got a dog. And when you watch a sunset, that voice isn't happening because it's a totally new sunset, right? Every sunset's brand new. And so you're just in the moment, in the presence of the sunset, not thinking. So the mind is actually never observing anything. Consciousness is observing it, but it's always behind or beyond the mind. It's always beyond anything that you can possibly conceptualize. If you ask yourself, what is aware of my experience? This is a really huge key question you can start asking yourself. What is it that is aware of my experience? Because if you say the mind, well, there is also something that is aware of the mind. Some intelligence is also aware of mind. And even the idea or the desire to go beyond the mind is seen by that which is already beyond the mind. This intelligence. And this intelligence is the only true intelligence that exists. The mind can only take snapshots and screenshots and remember things and revert back to things. But it always gives it a false sense of knowing, a false definition. Because you can't possibly conceptualize every variable about a tree or a dog or a human. I mean, their essence is beyond conceptualization. So when you stop referring to the labels, when you don't allow your mind to slap definitions and borders and boundaries on everything, then all of life begins to come alive. And this sense of experiencing life, experiencing reality without defining it, becomes a much deeper sense of knowing than the mind is, because it is intelligence beyond language. And so when you go beyond language, conceptualization, you become one with that which you observe. And so even though you might not be able to explain it in words, you understand its essence, because the same essence that is inside of it is inside of you. And so because consciousness does not have anything to prove, it doesn't have a motive or an agenda of any kind, it's not going to communicate to you with language, right, with words, because it's intelligence that is vastly beyond language. Language only slows down intelligence. And when you get a gut instinct, a gut feeling of not to do something or strongly to do something, it might take you 5 minutes to explain it all to your friend, but when it came to you, it was instantaneously downloaded. All the variables, everything you should do, what's happening, what you're feeling, all came immediately without language. That's what true intelligence is like, and that is what is existing within you. And so the only thing you need to do, in a sense, even though it's not even an action you take, is to rest your awareness in itself and stop resting your awareness in the mind. Stop identifying with the mind. Because if you're identified with the mind, you're going to always be not very intelligent. You're going to resist the moment. You're going to complain and worry all the time. And consciousness knows that this moment is the way it is because of the infinite sequences of events that came before it, going all the way back to the Big Bang. So resisting this moment is futile. It's pointless. You're only creating suffering for yourself. But the mind doesn't know any of those variables. So it just says, I don't like the moment the way it is. I'm resisting it. I'm angry about it. I wish I could change it. And it plays these mind tricks to try and change something that cannot be changed. And so this is essentially stupidity. And we all know people who are like this, who always have to be right, who always pretend as if they know everything. And to all of us, it doesn't seem like they're intelligent. It seems like they're unintelligent. But from their perspective, they think they're impressing people. They think that they're proving themselves. And this is just the way that the mind asserts itself, its fake identity, into reality. The mind is constantly trying to assert its existence because in essence, it doesn't exist. The ego is just a bunch of thoughts that are always changing all the time. Your opinions of yourself, your idea of yourself changes every hour. Every experience you have changes it a little bit. So how can you be that which is constantly in a state of change? What you are, what is natural, what is real, is that which is unchanging, which is consciousness, which is intelligence. So information becomes available to you when you need it. Consciousness isn't going to present itself out of nowhere to you and tell you a story or predict the future for you because it doesn't need to do anything. It is perfect. But you come in touch with that intelligence inside of you if you're in the present moment. And when you're in a situation, you find that the right words to say just arise out of nowhere. And they're more poignant, and they're more precise, and they're more intelligent, and they're more timely. And the actions to take just arise. You just take the right actions without thinking about it. And it seems as if you're not doing anything at all. Some force, some intelligence is doing it for you. And this is what they call in sports the flow state. Right? The being in the zone. Michael Jordan coined the term being in the zone, and he said, when I was in the zone, I couldn't miss a basket. I couldn't make a wrong play. Because being in the zone means you're not thinking. You're just performing. There's just pure action without thought. And when this state is achieved, the intelligence, the true intelligence inside of you is able to command the body to move and play and perform exactly to the best possible maximum amount of its ability, of its learned ability. It can be the best version of itself. And so anybody who performs or is in sports of any kind knows this is the secret to performing your best. You have to get in that flow state. But the key to staying in the flow state is to never acknowledge the flow state. And that's because as soon as you start saying, oh my gosh, I'm in the flow state, I'm doing it, I'm crushing it. Well, that is the mind saying it, right? And the mind, the flow state is the absence of mind. So you're out of the flow state. And we also see this happening all of the time in these very tragic events that we see on the news, such as these mass shootings that happen over and over again. In the Las Vegas massacre, for example, there were so many heroic stories of people jumping in front of bullets, dragging people to safety, taking down the gunman. And when they're interviewed on TV, they always say the same thing. They say, can you explain to me how you became such a hero in a moment of such fear and terror? How did you do it, sir? And they just say, I don't know what came over me. It was like I wasn't thinking at all. I just saw what needed to be done, and I just jumped into action. That is intelligence. Intelligence is immediate. It is responsive, whereas the mind is reactive. So if you see a child floating down the river, drowning, the heart or the intelligence jumps to action right away without thinking, without taking any thought of itself. The mind says, well, I should save this child right now, but the water looks very cold and it's moving very fast. What if I myself get swept up in the current? But I should save this kid. It would be very heroic. Too slow. It's too late. He's already gone. There's too many variables to process. The mind is too slow, and it cares about its own identity too much. So it's weak. It's drained of power. But behind the mind is a reality which looks without need to judge or interpret. It already knows. It already is. It can move without picking anything up. It can see without collecting. The mind always has to make a tattoo out of everything, right? Because it's taking everything as an attachment, as part of its identity. And this is how it fabricates a false sense of control. But in truth, you have absolutely no control over reality. You have no control over what's happening around you. You can control the space of your own life a little bit, but even that you can't control very much. What's going to happen next is out of your control completely. And the mind hates that idea. The mind does not like to not be in control. So it pretends like it's in control by thinking about the future, planning for the future, worrying about the future. And now practical thinking, practical future is okay. Tomorrow we'll meet at 12:30 at this place. Cool, see you then. That's fine. But psychological future, dreaming, imagining all the scenarios. What will I be like? What will happen to me? What will happen to them? What if this? What should I do if that happens? That's mind, and that's just draining you of energy and taking you out of the present moment. And the present moment might be telling you something. In fact, it always is telling you something. It's always showing you something about yourself. It's always requiring something of you, not in the doing sense, but in the experiential sense. And if you're up here, you miss it. But when you rest in the beingness itself, in the awareness itself, you are always aware of what life is bringing to you and how it's always working out for your good. Even if it's suffering in the moment, it works out for your good. This is the beauty of life, and this is the grace of life. But the mind can't see any of this truth. So this is the normal state of consciousness for most humans. most 99% of humans on the earth are completely 100% identified with their mind, with their ego. They think that they are the chattering voice in their head. And at some point, all of us have thought that. But awakening happens when you have the recognition of, wow, I used to think I was the narrating voice in my mind. But now I can see that I am actually aware of it, of its functions, of its predictability, of its habits. And so I must be something beyond the mind. And this recognition only comes from intelligence. Because the ego can only be an unconscious movement. If someone is doing something in ego, saying something in ego, they don't know that they are, because they're being completely hypnotized by it. But in order to dissolve any pattern of the ego, all you have to do is become aware of it. All you have to do is let true intelligence see it, and then your identity immediately shifts, because you know what you really are. Beingness knows what it really is. And so this is the same idea Jesus talked about when he said, a man cannot serve two masters. He will either hate one and love the other. And so you have to live either from the mind or from the heart. The heart has true intelligence. The mind has fake intelligence. The mind only claims responsibility or claims credit for it. But this is an insecure place to live from. This is an unstable place to live from. Your ideas of yourself are always changing, always malleable, always vulnerable to attack. But the heart is complete. The heart is perfect. It lacks nothing. It needs nothing. It just shines by itself. While the mind works, the heart shines. And you can know yourself as this consciousness, this awareness, this intelligence, as your real experience of life. But you just have to continue to rest your identity in your awareness itself. What is it that knows my experience? Because it's not my mind. It sure as hell isn't my mind. There is some force beyond it, and I must be that. So in essence, the mind makes a wonderful servant, but a horrible master. So recognize that you are that which is beyond the mind, and that is true intelligence.